Hello and welcome back to the Conflict Skills Podcast. I'm your host, professional mediator Simon Goode. In today's episode of the podcast, I'm going to be talking about a particular framework that you can use for self-care, for avoiding burnout and for managing your well-being, particularly in the context of conflict. It follows an acronym GROW, G-R-O-W. Now, I really like that GROW framework for coaching, as in helping other people develop their self-efficacy, I guess, for dealing with conflict. So it's an acronym for goals, reality, options, and way forward. But in the episode today, I'll talk about how you can apply it more along the lines of looking after yourself. I've noticed that at the moment, that topic of self-care or how do I manage my well-being or that kind of thing, switching off after work, it's a very common request I'm getting at the moment for quotes for training workshops. And so I wonder if maybe this is something that's kind of relevant, if you know what I mean, for you at the moment too. So the process that I'll be explaining today follows the GROW acronym, G-R-O-W, which stands for goal, reality, options, and then way forward, or what will you do is the W. It's from at least the acronym itself is from a book called Coaching for Performance by John Whitmore. And by the way, that is just an incredibly good book. It's also on Audible. I don't have any affiliation or anything, but I found it very helpful in my own leadership journey. And I mean, I've studied myself. I have an MBA. I've done lots of different leadership courses, but that particular coaching book was incredibly helpful for me, and that GROW model in particular, because it helps you be able to support your staff without getting sucked into rescuer mode. In any case, I also think that same set of steps, the goal, reality, options, and way forward, can also be a helpful framework for, I guess, what you would call self-coaching. Now, I can remember when I was first studying coaching, I was watching a whole bunch of different online videos and that kind of stuff, just figuring out how do you differentiate, like what are the types? Are there particular models that are famous or not? My organization at the time, I was working in a not-for-profit before I left, actually, before I quit, a few months before, getting told by this senior manager, a member of the executive team there, that they were going to now have a coaching process for all of the team leaders and managers. And I was working and managing a few different programs across the state at the time. And I had an MBA, or I was studying it. I can't remember if I'd finished it or not. But in any case, it's not common to have an MBA at that level of leadership in the not-for-profit sector where I was in. And my bosses didn't have any qualifications to do with leadership. And I can remember when this senior manager came and told me, Simon, you're going to get coaching. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. Just could you please explain to me what framework we're going to use? What model of coaching do you prefer? And I can remember the blank look of just a complete, utter lack of comprehension on this person's face as they maybe realized that there would be different types of coaching in the same way that there's different types of counseling. There's CBT or psychotherapy or solution-focused brief therapy or whatever else it might be. And similarly in coaching, you'll find different acronyms, the ACT acronym, there's a whole bunch of them. And you know, every time I talk about the GROW model, somebody pipes up and says, I know this other model that's incredibly useful. I mean, that's fantastic. If you've got a good other model that works for you too, I wonder if maybe you would be considering it also an option for self-coaching. Anyway, when I was looking at all of these different online resources and people talked about all different styles of coaching, one of the things that they often said was that you can't coach yourself. And I've heard the same thing sometimes said about counselling, like you can't counsel yourself. I suppose that's true in a sense. Obviously, another person would see what you're sharing in a different way, and getting that external perspective could be helpful. And it's different, isn't it? Like talking to an actual person versus just, well, I guess you talk to yourself or write it down or spend time thinking about it yourself. But for me, I found an incredible amount of benefit at self-coaching, I suppose, is what you would call it, if I can keep the focus on something that's productive. Like for me at the moment, I've got a few, these are incredibly, incredibly minor in the grand scheme of things, but a few annoying issues going on with my family at the moment that have just rubbed me the wrong way. And I can simultaneously realize just how absurd and ridiculous I'm being at even focusing on this for 1 second. It's completely irrelevant. It's the kind of stuff that we'll never remember in a couple of years' time. And yet I find myself through the day having these imaginary conversations about who should and shouldn't do what, or why is this expected of me? That's not fair. Where did you get that idea from? There's no external rule book that says this is how we should treat each other as a family. I mean, this is all of the most absurd stuff that you can imagine, and it's literally all in my head. Anyway, I sometimes get stuck in these negative cycles of almost self-complaining and whinging, which in reality I think is self-justifying. I'm constantly trying to remind myself that I'm right and they're wrong. I know why I'm wired this way. It's because historically this may have been a helpful way of dealing with threats for my cave-dwelling ancestors. And I presume probably that, I'm not really a fighter. I'm not going to be particularly good at physically defending myself if someone wants to attack me. So it wouldn't surprise me if I got really good at influencing the other people around me, as in my ancestors, my genetic line. And so part of what I needed to do if I was going to get good at influencing people was to pay attention to a lot of stuff like relationships. So I suspect I'm a little bit more hardwired. I mean, whether or not you say this is hardwired in terms of the genetics or almost an epigenetic factor where we inherit the behaviors from our parents, not so much directly through the DNA, or although it could be, but it could be things like your in utero experience. For example, if your mum had an elevated level of adrenaline, maybe that influenced your development. I mean, it's hard to pull apart exactly what bits contribute to what. And as you look at any of the science around these different areas, like psychology, for example, there's always going to be people that are groupers. They lump things together. It's like, these are the two hemispheres of the brain. These are the two sections. And then there's like dividers that want to look at the individual components right down to the neuron, like the cellular level. Anyway, in terms of the pattern of why I've developed this, I'm not exactly sure, but it's something that I have to be careful of, because if I don't actively manage my thinking patterns, I can get really stuck. It's like Groundhog Day, and I'm on the broken record thinking about this person that's annoyed me. And I know from talking to other people, even a family member that I talked to this morning, other people also are affected by the same thing. You just kind of get in a loop, and it's not a very comfortable place to be. You actually feel worked up. It's hard to concentrate. Like this morning, I haven't got a whole lot of work done. You're not able to choose your words carefully. Like I was much more abrupt and, to be honest, in hindsight, a little bit rude to the person that I was talking to this morning. And I think it then also leaves you with a sense of maybe shame or guilt or something. Like I recognize that actually I wasn't a very supportive family member in this morning's interaction. And that sucks, Historically, again, this is something that we want to avoid. So in my brain, I'm scrambling for reasons why, like justify my behavior kind of thing. And the reality is that if I could just pause and accept it and acknowledge the fact that I did do that, and maybe even think about a nice thing that I can do to repair it, like send this person an SMS like, "How you going, smiley face," or "Did you see this funny thing," or "Looking forward to this actually," or "I just tried that recipe that you gave me ages ago. That's so nice. Thank you for sharing it." Like that kind of a little positive message, if I could send that, then I'd probably get myself out of this cycle. But in the moment, that can be really difficult to recognize and then to know what to do to interrupt it. So the GROW model for me can be a little bit of a circuit breaker. It's like a structured framework that interrupts the natural story that I tell myself and the sequence of events that I normally step through, and instead gets me to focus on areas that will actually be helpful. So what you'll basically do is to follow those steps in the acronym, the goal, reality, options, and way forward. So goal might be to start by asking yourself a question like, how would I like to be feeling? How would I like to be thinking? If I were going to be more productive, what would I spend the rest of the afternoon doing? If I were able to get one or two things done, what are the top priorities for me right now? If I were to sleep better at night, what kind of a relationship would I like to have with the other person? So we don't need necessarily to figure out the steps to get there. The goal, the G, part of this process is just to think about what's important to you and realistically what is achievable. And in amongst all of the things that would be nice to have done or nice to get, what's the priority? What's the most important? I think a lot of the time, even just acknowledging the fact that you're not going to be able to achieve everything that you thought you would today means that instead of beating yourself up constantly and reminding yourself about what a fail you are and how disorganized and or how annoyed you are at this other person for making you late this morning and it's caused all of these flow-on effects. Instead, it's just saying, well, I'm going to draw a line in the sand here. I'm not going to take all of this negative emotion forward with me. So the goal is, what are the things I want to take forward? It's maybe let me just use the last couple of hours I've got in the day to at least get something productive done so that I don't walk home and the whole day is wasted. So you could ask yourself those kind of questions, like how would I like to be in terms of my thinking or feeling or behavior? You could also break that apart in terms of your physiology, like what does your body need? Are you hungry? Are you tired? Do you need some rest, for example? If you've got a lot of rumination happening, a lot of the time what you actually need is exercise. So coming up with some kind of a plan in the next few hours to get outside and get your heart rate a little bit elevated, like go for a walk, but see if you can go up a steep hill or something like that along the way. What that does is it burns off a little bit of the kinetic energy that's built up as we've been gradually escalating and entering into a small, an early stage of fight or flight response, which does require a physical action. So that's what our body's been getting ready for. So thinking about what your body needs, and that would depend on what's been draining it. If it's been a hot, exhausting day working outside in the sun, then you probably literally need time in a comfortable, quiet, cool environment just to be still. If you've spent time doing head kind of work and looking through a database all day, then maybe for you it's social connecting with someone who actually fills you up versus maybe the well-intentioned family members or friends, but some family members or friends are better for self-care on some days rather than others, if you know what I mean. Like sometimes we're up for an adventure and other times we just want to veg out or have a quick SMS exchange versus someone that wants to chat on the phone for 30 minutes. Chat on the phone for 30 minutes. Does anybody actually still chat on the phone for 30 minutes? Maybe it's just me, but I don't know if I could tolerate a 30-minute phone call these days. It's just too much, isn't it? It's hard to almost put your finger on exactly what it is, but I do know that I don't particularly want to do it. So the next step is the reality. And so here we reflect on what's happened and where things are up to at the moment. The starting point could be thinking about the negative spirals, like how am I feeling at the moment, and then how is that affecting my behavior? And then if that doesn't change moving forward, like I've had a couple of beers with lunch, which I normally wouldn't do because I'm feeling a bit stressed, which I haven't today, by the way, but I sometimes do when I'm in more of a negative frame of mind. It's just my brain's craving dopamine. It just wants to feel good. And if I've been sort of sitting there stewing in cortisol, the stress hormone, all morning, then my brain's going to look for a quick fix to get me out of it. And sometimes it's my subconscious bit of my brain guiding my hand to reach for a beer in the fridge. So it's like, what's the reciprocal spiral here between what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and how I'm acting? What's the reciprocal spiral in terms of me and the other person? Like there's this incident that I'm focused on at the moment, but how have I dealt with this in the past and what worked well then? And how is that contributing to what's going on at the moment? What have I done? And the way that I can often find it in myself to take on board some responsibility is that I really drill down into a fine level of detail. What did I say? I wonder how they might have interpreted my facial expression, for example. How was the meeting set up? And acknowledging that I wasn't in control of all of this, but which factors might have made them feel uncomfortable from the word go. And then I almost ask myself questions like, what else could be going on? For me, a really helpful part of this reality step is reality testing, as in, what are the assumptions that I'm making here, and am I sure? And am I sure that I'm sure? I just find that to be an incredibly helpful process to go through. And sometimes I think, yeah, I'm probably right. My original take on the situation was probably pretty close. But regardless of whether or not I still hold on to my initial view or not, just the process of reminding myself that actually there might be a number of different things that have happened here. It seems like they're not getting back to me because they're annoyed at me. And so, it's likely that that's happened. They had, not responded to me last time around the same issue. And so it would make sense that that's what's going on for them. But their phone might be flat. They might have been hurt. They might have not seen it. Their partner or their kids might have grabbed the phone and checked it. And so now they don't have the unread notification there, even though they haven't read the message yet. It doesn't matter. It's just maybe 4 or 5 alternative explanations for what's going on, including alternative motivations that the other person might have. I think then it's almost like my brain is forced to look at the situation at more of a granular level and stop making these assumptions, which is similar to what it does when we escalate, when we're in fight or flight mode. It doesn't matter about the rational thinking and the facts. Like, our brain just needs to keep us safe, and usually that just means acting in the best way that it can. So by slowing down and almost reminding myself and my subconscious brain at the same time that there are a number of reasons why, that there are a number of factors that I'm not aware of and that I don't have the full picture, it then inherently means that I stop taking it as personally. It helps me to differentiate from the experiences or the issue or the other person's emotions or whatever else might be going on. Options. Here, what we want to do is to basically just brainstorm as many possible alternatives as we can. And we want to aim for quantity rather than quality, as in get as many different options down as possible rather than worrying about whether or not they're realistic or whether or not they're going to work or whether or not this one's better than this one. It's like the first step is just do a dump, like just collate as many ideas as possible. I usually find it helpful to write this down, even if I haven't written down the previous two steps. I've just reflected on it, getting my phone out and using my notes app or something like that just for a dot point list. And I'm not, it's probably just a few words on each one to remind myself of what they are. So, I've got this person that, let's imagine that they want to hang out with you more frequently and you don't want to see them, or they want to talk on the phone a lot and you're not the kind of person that likes talking on the phone. Well, let's think about the options to deal with that. 1, we could just not answer when they call. 2, we could let them know that actually we'd prefer not to talk on the phone as often and see if we can negotiate something. So almost put it on the table and discuss it and try and resolve it. But I suppose in a sense that's then also formalizing it and naming it versus just doing something like, I'm busy, can't you get the message, or something like that. So that could be a third option. We could be a little bit sarcastic. A fourth option might be we could check with another family member if they've got a view on it. Do they talk to the other person all the time on the phone? Maybe that's an expectation that's been set or something. We could, instead of putting forward our view that I want you to know that I just don't want to talk to you as much, maybe instead saying to them something like, I've noticed that a lot of people aren't talking on the phone as much as they used to, but it still seems like something that's quite important to you. I just want to check that I've got that right, because I'm happy to make an effort if it is something that you really like. Or I'm wondering if maybe we could try email or maybe online chats at particular times or something else. But before we even discuss any options, I suppose I just wanted to touch base with you and find out your thoughts on it. So maybe instead of us even saying anything along the lines of this is what I want, maybe our starting point could be something like, what's your take on the phone calls? Is there a particular reason you want to do it? Like, for all you know, they're just doing it because they think that you want to be called. So it's just like we don't want to rush in. There's no benefit to that in terms of practically solving the conflict. If we come in and say, I want this, I do not want to talk to you on the phone, then of course the natural response from them is, oh, but, and then you're going to be in, to some extent, a little bit of a debate. It's this adversarial way of raising the issue, as opposed to saying something like, I wanted to talk about the phone calls. What's your take on it? What kind of a schedule would work for you? Could we put in a little bit of structure? I mean, I don't know what would work in terms of how often and what time's best. But if I can know when to expect it, it means that, I'll be able to concentrate more and I won't be as frazzled and distracted. What do you reckon? So we go through this process of developing options. We don't want to necessarily judge them or evaluate them during the process of putting them together. But then once we've got the options on the table, I usually just use a very simple process of identifying the top ones. It's usually 2 or 3. Sometimes it's just 1. And then I look at them in a little bit more detail. Like, I try and limit the time I spend on this, usually, if it's something like a friend that wants a phone call or whatever. And I'm just thinking about, is there anything I haven't thought of? Am I missing anything? What is the benefit? What's the, almost like a cost-benefit analysis. Like, what's the cost and what's the benefit of option A? What's the cost and what's the benefit of option B? What's the cost and what's the benefit of option C? Now, all of these decision-making processes sound really great, and I'm aware that when I'm doing training workshops, people are often writing them down and they're often really paying attention, a little bit mesmerized about the fact that I can describe the process of making a decision. But the truth is that we don't usually follow such a structured process in the situation, like when we're actually trying to decide. So for me, I almost just look at the 3 options or 2 options or however many I've got. It's usually easy to identify what are the top ones, like what are the absolute, that's just not going to work for this reason, it's too risky or it doesn't have much chance of working or whatever. So you got a few that are possible. I think in a lot of conflict situations, unless you can get any additional information, then all of those options are basically the equivalent of each other. As in, if you don't know what's going to happen, if you'd go down this path, then this might happen. If you go down this path, you're not exactly sure this might happen. You could raise it with them and try to be assertive, but then they might get defensive. On the other hand, you've never tried being assertive with them, so maybe they'd be more receptive than you think. Option B would be to be more accommodating, and the concern there is that they feel like they can walk all over the top of you. But ultimately, it might mean that they cool off a little bit if they feel like they're not being as threatened, like if you can give them a bit more consistency. The truth is that you don't know. You're going to have to just pick one and give it a try. And in my head, what I usually try and remind myself is that, look, they're all basically as good as each other. One of them might work and I might accidentally pick the wrong one. But unless I can get access to any additional information, it's probably not worth spending any more time thinking about this. Whereas that feels gross when you do make a decision without all of the information. There is often something in the back of our mind that's uncomfortable. It's telling us this is risky, and it is risky. The thing is that if you've only got 2 equally risky options to choose from, there's probably not a lot of benefit in postponing the decision because of the risk. Do you know what I mean? That type of procrastination is often, I think, becomes a stressor in itself. So then the final step is way forward. You have decided on what a possible option might be, that you're willing to give it a go, even if you're not exactly sure how it's going to play out. The way forward step is about planning. So what we want to do here is to come up with a concrete set of steps that we're going to do next. It might be I'm going to draft the email, I'll go and make a coffee, I'll check it finally, and then I'll press send. So it's 4 steps, and I want to do it before 3 p.m. or, if that's the time that you normally have coffee or something like that. Like try and synchronize it with some type of a milestone, a time in the afternoon or a particular day that you want it to get done. So we want to almost use the SMART goal acronym, the specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound, etc. Whatever version of SMART that you use, because there's quite a few different variations floating around. But if we say, I'd really like to raise it with the team member, that's great, self, well done. We've gone through a really helpful process of reflection there. You're probably still not going to do it. So the more specific you can be about the actual steps that you'll take, the more likely it is that you'll do it. And then the way that this type of positive reciprocal process works is that once we've approached one conflict in this, I guess you'd call it like a structured problem-solving type of way, using that GROW acronym, it helps us to feel more confident because we know that we've dealt with uncertain conflict situations in the past, and although it felt sticky and yucky and overwhelming and toxic or whatever it felt like back then, like here we are, we're still breathing, we got through it, and we can get through it again. Simply having these types of things being familiar means that when you can't feel the ground under you, and you're not sure if you're sinking or you're swimming, that's not the first time that you've been here. You've been here before. And so again, we've got the process that we can fall back on of figuring out what's important, where are we up to at the moment, what are the options that we can use to move things forward, and what would that look like? And then it tends to mean that we feel more composed because we're thinking about ourselves in terms of a higher level of self-efficacy, like our own ability to manage these kind of situations moving forward, which interestingly is exactly what tends to happen from that GROW coaching model when a manager or a team leader uses it with a staff member. So I hope that that's been helpful for you, thinking about that GROW model of almost self-care or self-coaching or self-counselling, or trying to get your head straight when you're all mixed up and nothing seems to be working, and when you're stuck in those negative thought patterns around conflict. If you've got feedback about the podcast, you can shoot me an email. It's podcast@simongoode.com. Again, if it's been useful for you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you would consider leaving a positive review. It makes a really big difference to the algorithm for little podcasts like this when people say, hey, this one's been helpful for me. So thank you very much in advance if that's something that you're prepared to do. And otherwise, I hope to see you or meet you again as a listener of a future episode of the Conflict Skills podcast. Bye for now.